Rule 0. Two kitchens. There are two kinds of families in this country. Not rich and poor. Not educated and uneducated. Not even lucky and unlucky. Though luck gets mentioned a lot when people don't want to say what they actually mean. Two kinds of families. The ones who talk about money and the ones who don't. You probably grew up in the second kind. Money in your house was weather. It happened to you. You didn't control it, you didn't discuss it, you just looked out the window and adjusted your plans accordingly. Some weeks were fine. Some weeks your parents got very quiet and very practical, and everyone pretended not to notice the shift in pressure. Nobody handed you a roadmap. Nobody sat you down at 14 and said, "Here is how wealth actually works. Here is how compound interest functions. Here is why the family down the street with the less impressive jobs somehow has more than us." Those conversations didn't happen. Not because your parents didn't love you, because nobody had them with your parents either. Meanwhile, across town or across the country, or somewhere you've never been but can imagine, there's a kitchen table where a different conversation is happening. A 14-year-old is being told that money is a tool, that assets put money in your pocket, that liabilities take money out, that the goal, the actual goal, isn't to earn more. It's to eventually stop trading time for money altogether. That 14 years old grows up with a map. You grew up with instincts. Good ones, maybe, hard-earned ones. But instincts and a map are not the same thing in the dark. This is the story of what happens when you find the map at 22, what it does to you, what it costs you, and what it quietly, irreversibly, changes about everything that comes after. Rule 1. Assets and liabilities. The sentence that splits your life in two. You are 22. You have a job. Maybe a good one. Maybe one that felt like winning when you got it. Because in the world you came from, a steady paycheck with benefits was the destination, not the starting line. You're doing what you were supposed to do. You are responsible. You pay your bills on time. You're saving a little, not much, but some, in a savings account earning somewhere between nothing and insult as an interest rate. And then you read something. Or someone says something, or a video plays to the end instead of getting scrolled past, and a single sentence enters your mind and refuses to leave. Rich people buy assets. Everyone else buys liabilities they think are assets. You read it 3 times. You're not sure you understand it, but something in it hums at a frequency you can't ignore. You go looking. You find the longer explanation. An asset, in the actual definition, not the accounting textbook definition, is anything that puts money into your pocket while you're not working. A liability is anything that takes money out. Your car is not an asset. Your house, depending on how it's structured, may not be an asset. The things that feel like symbols of success, the new car, the nice apartment, the wardrobe that says you've arrived, are, in this framework, the machinery of staying exactly where you are. This information is not new. It's in books that have sold millions of copies. It is, in some sense, widely available. But available and received are not the same thing. Information you're not prepared to hear slides off you like water. Information that lands on fertile ground changes the soil. At 22, in the right moment, this sentence changes the soil. You sit with it for a few days. You look at your life through this new lens, and what you see is uncomfortable. Almost everything you've been working toward, the car upgrade, the nicer apartment, the lifestyle inflation that was supposed to be the reward for getting the job, is a liability wearing the costume of success. You're not building anything. You're maintaining a lifestyle. The rich family's kid knew this at 14. You're finding out at 22. That's 8 years. But here's what's also true. 22 is not too late. 22, with this information and the discipline to use it, is still devastatingly early. You make a choice. A quiet, private, completely unsexy choice. You decide to buy your first asset before you buy your next liability. It will take longer than you think. It will require saying no to things that everyone around you is saying yes to. But you do it. And the day you do, something shifts. Not in your bank account, not yet. In your identity. You are no longer just someone who earns and spends. You are someone who builds. That's a different person. That person has a different future. Rule 2. The tax code is a love letter to investors. You just weren't told you could read it. There's a reason the wealthiest people you've ever heard of pay a lower percentage in taxes than their secretaries. It's not a glitch. It's not corruption, or not only corruption, it's architecture. The tax code was not written to punish the rich. It was written, in many places, by people who were rich, for the benefit of people who would invest, build businesses, create jobs. Whether you think that's fair is a separate conversation. What matters right now, at 22, is that the rules exist whether you know them or not. The rich family's kid learns this early, not in a cynical way, not as a loophole, as a literacy. There are accounts that grow tax-free. There are structures that let you defer taxes for decades. There are ways to lose money on paper while gaining it in reality. There are write-offs for the serious and penalties, invisible but real, for the unaware. You grew up thinking taxes were something that happened to your paycheck before you ever saw it. A fixed, unavoidable, non-negotiable subtraction. You probably still think of them that way. The kid from the other kitchen table grew up knowing taxes are a conversation, a negotiation between what the law requires and what it allows. And the distance between those two things, over a lifetime of earning, is not thousands of dollars. It's millions. You are not going to become a tax attorney at 22. That's not the point. The point is this. You need to know that there is a game being played with rules you were never taught. And the first move is simply deciding to learn the rules. You open an IRA. You max it. It feels like nothing. In 30 years, that nothing compounds into something so large, it doesn't fit inside the financial framework you used to have. You learn what an S-corp is. You learn what depreciation means to an investor. You sit in on a conversation with a CPA for the first time, and you realize that the person across the desk is not just someone who files your return. They are, or they can be, if you find the right one, a translator between you and a system that is trying to tell you something in a language you weren't taught. You start learning the language, slowly, imperfectly. But you start. And here is what nobody tells you about financial literacy. It's not neutral. Every concept you learn reorders the ones before it. Understanding compound interest makes your savings account feel criminal. Understanding passive income makes overtime feel different. Understanding tax-advantaged accounts makes spending pre-tax dollars on things you'd buy anyway feel like a revelation so obvious you can't believe it was hidden this long. It wasn't hidden. You just weren't in the room where it was discussed. You're in the room now. Rule 3. The network is the net worth, and you built the wrong one. You have good friends. Loyal ones. People who have known you since before you were anyone. Who remember every version of you. Who would show up at 2 a.m. if the situation required it. This is not about them. This is about something more uncomfortable. The rich family's kid grows up at tables where the conversation is different. Not smarter, not more moral, different. The adults in the room talk about deals in progress, about who's hiring, about a property that's undervalued, about a contact who could open a door. The child absorbs it the way children absorb everything completely, without knowing they're doing it. By the time that child is 22, they have a network they didn't build on purpose. It built itself around them, through family dinners and school connections and the ambient exposure to people who move in circles where things happen. You are 22 and your network is your high school friends, your coworkers, and a few relatives. These are people you love. They are not, in most cases, people who can change the trajectory of your career with a phone call. This is not a condemnation. It's a description. Here is the rule the rich family teaches, usually without saying it out loud. Your income is the average of your access, and access is something you build deliberately. You start to think about this. Not cynically, not transactionally, but honestly. You look at the people you spend the most time with. You ask yourself, not who is loyal, not who is fun, but who is building something, who is learning something, who talks about possibility like it's a real place and not a postcard someone else sent. You start going to things that feel slightly above your current altitude. A business meetup where you don't know anyone. A conference that stretches the credit card. A course that puts you in a room with people who are ahead of you, which is uncomfortable, which is the point. You meet someone. One person. who introduces you to one concept, that connects you to one opportunity, that changes one number in your life. This is how networks actually work. Not like a Rolodex, like a garden. You plant something, you tend it, you don't know which seed becomes the tree, until years later when you're standing in the shade of something you barely remember planting. The rich family's kid doesn't have to plant from scratch. You do. That's more work, but it's also more yours. Every relationship you build from this point forward is intentional. It carries a kind of weight that inherited networks don't. And over time, not in months, in years, your world changes shape. Not because you abandoned the people you love, because you added people to your life who expanded what you thought was possible. That expansion changes everything downstream. Rule 4. Multiple streams. The idea that sounds like a cliché until you need it to save your life. You have one income stream. Most people have one income stream. The job pays you. The job stops paying you. The job is gone, and so is everything. Rich families don't teach their kids to find a good job and hold on. They teach them that the goal is to eventually own things that earn while you sleep. Rental income, dividends, business revenue, royalties, equity in something that grows whether you show up or not. At 22, this sounds like abstract wealth advice. Something that applies to other people with capital you don't have. And for right now, partially, it is. You're not going to build a real estate portfolio tomorrow. You're not going to launch a business this afternoon. But you can do something. Something small. Something that feels embarrassing in its smallness. You can build the second thing. A skill you monetize on weekends. A digital product that takes you 3 months to create and then exists forever. A brokerage account you fund with $100 a month, then $200, then more as you scale. A piece of content that earns something even in the months you don't touch it. It's not the second income stream that matters. Not at first. It's the identity shift of becoming someone who has more than one. Because here's what one income stream does to you psychologically. It makes you afraid. Not consciously, not always, but the fear is there, underneath. The low-grade awareness that the whole structure depends on one relationship, one employer, one economic season going well. That fear makes you smaller. It makes you afraid to ask for what you're worth. It makes you stay in situations that don't serve you, because the alternative is nothing, and nothing is terrifying when it's all you have. 2 income streams change the math. 3 change the personality. By the time you're 25, if you started at 22, you have something that most people in your economic background won't build until their 40s, if ever. You have options. Not wealth, maybe not yet, but options. The ability to say no. The ability to leave. The ability to take a risk that would have been reckless a few years ago because the floor now holds you in more than one place. The rich family kid was told this at 14. Never depend on a single source of income. It wasn't even a lesson. It was said at the dinner table like a weather report, like an obvious fact. You're learning it at 22. It will cost you more. It will take longer without the runway that inherited wealth provides. But you will understand it, eventually, in a way that the kid who learned it passively might not, because you will have built it from the ground up with your own hands. And what you build from the ground up, you understand structurally. You know where every load-bearing wall is. Rule 5. Time is the asset nobody tells poor families about. There is a number that will make you angry when you first encounter it. If you invest $500 a month starting at 22, at an average market return of 10%, you will have approximately $2.9 million by the time you're 62. If you wait until 32 to start 10 years later, 1 decade, the decade you spent not knowing the rules, you will have approximately $1.1 million. The same discipline, the same monthly amount, the same 40-year endpoint. 10 years of not knowing costs you $1.8 million. Time, in the world of compound interest, is not money. Time is more than money. Time is the multiplier that no salary increase can replicate. Time is the thing that turns ordinary, consistent, unsexy investing into numbers that don't look real. And who controls whether you know this at 22? The family you were born into. The rich family tells their kid about this early. Not because the kid is going to invest at 14, but because they want the concept to be native by the time the decision is available. They want compound interest to feel like gravity, not a strategy, just how things work. You didn't get that. You got to 22 and maybe 25 thinking investing was for people with extra money, which you didn't have, which means you'd start when you had more, which means you kept not starting. Here is what changes the moment you understand this. Really understand it in your body and not just your head. The urgency. The genuine, non-negotiable urgency of starting now with whatever you have and not waiting for the conditions to be perfect. The conditions will not be perfect. There will always be something to spend money on instead. The emergency that just happened. The opportunity that just appeared. The logic of waiting until things settle down, which is another way of saying waiting until time runs out. You open the account this week, not when you have more. This week, with whatever is embarrassingly small and feels pointless. You automate a transfer that will go out every month without requiring your willpower to activate. And then you leave it alone. That is the entire strategy. It's not complicated. It's not secret. The rich family's kid isn't smarter than you. They just had this conversation 10 years earlier. You can't get those 10 years back. You can start the next 10 years now. Rule 6. The difference between spending and investing in yourself. Your parents, if they were like most parents in your situation, had a complicated relationship with education. They believed in it. They worked to give you access to it. They framed it as the path. The one reliable path from where you started to somewhere better. But they didn't draw the distinction. Nobody did. There's spending on yourself, and there's investing in yourself. Spending looks like education as credentials. The degree that costs 4 years and substantial debt because the credential was the goal. Because the piece of paper was supposed to open the door, and you needed the piece of paper regardless of what was behind the door or whether the door was the right one. Investing looks different. It looks like a $500 course that teaches you a skill the market currently pays well for. It looks like a book that changes how you see money, which is free at the library and somehow priceless. It looks like a mentor who costs you time and attention rather than tuition. It looks like getting better at one specific thing, and then letting that specific thing compound the way money compounds, slowly, then suddenly. The rich family's kid is taught to think about return on investment before they spend on education, not in a cold way, in a practical way. What does this build? What does this develop? Is this credential worth this cost? Or is there a faster path to the same capability? You were taught that education was non-negotiable and uncritical, that the path was defined and you followed it. At 22, with this new framework, you start to audit your spending on yourself, the subscriptions that aren't actually being consumed, the degree you're considering because it feels like the next logical step, rather than because it opens a door you've clearly identified. The things you spend money on to feel like you're improving versus the things that actually make you more valuable. You get ruthless about this. Not cruel, ruthless. Every dollar you spend on yourself is either going to make you more capable or more comfortable. And while comfort has its place, at 22, with everything in front of you, you bias aggressively toward capability. You take the course. You learn the skill. You do the uncomfortable thing of showing your work before it's perfect, putting something out into the world that might fail, which is the only way to learn whether it has a market. You invest in yourself the way an investor evaluates a startup. Not with blind faith, with strategic belief backed by evidence and adjusted by results. Over time, your earning capacity grows. Not because the economy handed you more, because you built something that the economy will pay for. That's different. That's portable. That's yours, regardless of who your employer is or what the market does. The rich family teaches their kid that they are their greatest asset, not their job, not their degree. Them, their skills, their network, their reputation, their ability to create value. You now know this. Build accordingly. Rule 7. The conversation with money you never had. There is something the rich family does that you are never going to encounter on your own. They talk about money at the table. Not to brag, not to stress, as a subject, as a thing that can be examined, discussed, understood. What did you make on that? How does that investment structure work? What's your exit strategy? Why did that deal go wrong, and what would you do differently? These conversations produce something invisible but crucial: comfort, familiarity, the sense that money is a knowable subject with learnable rules, not a mysterious force that happens to you based on factors beyond your control. You grew up in silence on this subject, or in stress, or in shame. You absorbed, without anyone saying it, that money was private, uncomfortable, a source of tension, not of curiosity. That silence cost you something. Not just knowledge, the relationship. Your relationship with money, the emotional one, the one that lives beneath the behavior, is shaped by everything you experienced around it before you were old enough to name it. The jaw tightening when the car made a noise, the subject changing when someone mentioned retirement, the specific weight of a month when things didn't add up. You carry that. It shows up in ways you don't always recognize. The anxiety you feel before checking your account, the way you avoid looking at a budget because knowing the number makes it real in an uncomfortable way, the impulse to spend when things go well because the money feels dangerous, feels like it might leave anyway, better to get ahead of it. The guilt when you accumulate something because something in you doesn't believe you're supposed to. Rich families teach their kids to have a clean relationship with money. Neutral, productive, clear-eyed. Not without emotion, but not ruled by it either. You have to build this relationship from scratch, in adulthood, with decades of conditioning underneath it. That's harder, but it's possible, and the people who do it, who not only learn the mechanical rules, but heal the emotional relationship, they don't just get ahead financially. They stay ahead. Because wealth held in an anxious grip tends to leak. Wealth held with clarity and intention tends to compound. You start talking about money. You find one person, who treats it as a subject worth understanding. You start having the conversations your family didn't. You track your spending, not as punishment, but as data. You name what you have and where it goes, not with shame, but with the same clinical interest you'd give any problem you intended to solve. Over time, months, not years, the anxiety quiets. Not completely, but enough to make decisions from a clearer place. To buy when the logic says buy. To hold when the panic says sell. To let the boring, automated strategy run without interference, which is, it turns out, most of what investing actually requires. The conversation you're having with money now is different than the one you grew up witnessing. That's not a small thing. That's one of the most significant things that can change in a life. Rule 8. 32. What the map buys you. You are 32 now. 10 years since you found the rules. A decade of buying assets before liabilities, of learning the tax structure, of building the second income, of investing in yourself and letting the market compound, and having the uncomfortable conversations your family never had. This is what your life looks like. Not perfect, never perfect. There were years that went sideways, a business that didn't work the way you drew it up, a market correction that made you nauseous, until you remembered what nausea at 22 taught you about staying the course, a relationship that couldn't survive the version of you that stopped shrinking. But this is what your life looks like. You have a net worth that doesn't make you famous. It makes you free. Quietly, genuinely, non-negotiably free. The kind of free where you don't do the math before you say yes. Where the car noise doesn't change the energy in the room. Where your mother asks if you need anything, and you can answer honestly without the answer being embarrassing. You have options. Real ones. Not the theoretical options of someone who was told they were talented. Actual choices, backed by actual resources, that bend your trajectory in directions your 22 years old self could picture but couldn't touch. You have a portfolio. Nothing that belongs on the cover of a financial magazine, but accounts with numbers in them that are growing without your permission. Because compound interest doesn't wait for you to pay attention. You have an emergency fund that isn't an emergency. It's just money, sitting there, not as an indulgence but as infrastructure. You have a network that makes things possible, not inherited, planted, tended, made of relationships that were built on mutual respect and genuine exchange, which is the only kind that survives. And you have something harder to name. You have the knowledge, not just the information, the integrated, lived, earned knowledge of how the system works. The language that was never taught to you because the assumption was that it wasn't for you. You speak it now. Imperfectly, still learning, but fluently enough to navigate rooms your family was never supposed to walk into. The person next to you, who is also 32, who grew up with the map, who had the table conversations at 14, they are not that far ahead of you. Some of them spent the map they inherited. Some of them were given every resource and no hunger, which turns out to be its own kind of poverty. You have both the map and the hunger. That combination is something. Rule 9. What you leave behind. You think about children, the ones you have or the ones you're going to have, the ones who will grow up in your house, which is not the house you grew up in, not in any way that matters. And you face the question that every first-generation wealth builder eventually faces. What do you give them? How much? In what form? You don't want to erase the hunger. You know what the hunger did for you. You know that the friction of wanting something you couldn't have, the specific education of not getting the school trip because it was the wrong week, made you someone who understood cost in a way that comfort doesn't teach. You don't want to give your children that pain, but you don't want to give them a version of security that becomes its own kind of ceiling, the soft ceiling. The one made of too much ease and not enough understanding of what things cost. So you make a decision that the rich family would recognize. You don't give them money, not first. You give them the conversations. You talk about money at the dinner table, not as stress. As a subject, you explain what an asset is. You let them see. You make a financial decision and explain your thinking. You take them to the bank and let them open an account when they're young enough that the number in it doesn't matter, but the relationship with it does. You give them a small investment and teach them to watch it, to understand that the number changes, that time does something to money that nothing else can replicate. You give them the map, not the shortcut, not the inheritance of capital without context, which history shows produces people who don't know what they have until they've lost it. The map, the language, the permission, which is the thing your parents couldn't give you because they didn't know it was possible. The permission to want more than what you started with. The expectation, stated plainly, that they will build something, not be given something. Build. You are building the architecture. The infrastructure of a family that talks about money, invests consistently, understands leverage, knows the tax code, builds networks on purpose, buys assets before liabilities, and doesn't stop at one income stream. Your children will be the first generation to inherit this, not as capital, but as culture. And culture, it turns out, is more durable than capital. Culture compounds differently. It doesn't lose value in a market correction. It doesn't get taxed at the estate level. It moves through families in a way that money, handled wrong, doesn't. Rule 10. The real thing the rich family taught. You've been through the rules now. Assets and liabilities. Tax structure, network as infrastructure, multiple income streams, the compound function of time, the return on self-investment, the emotional relationship with money, the conversations at the table. These are real rules. They work. The math supports them, the evidence is overwhelming, and the gap between people who know them and people who don't is not a gap in intelligence or even effort. It's a gap in access, in what was discussed, at what table, in what house. But here is the rule beneath the rules, the one that holds everything else up. Rich families teach their children that they are the kind of people for whom these things apply. That's it. That's the foundation. Because information without identity is unstable. You can know every rule in this video and still not use it, if somewhere underneath you believe that these rules are for other people. That the game is real, but you're watching from outside the fence. That the concepts make sense in theory, but the theory doesn't quite extend to someone like you. That belief is the last piece of the ceiling, the stealthiest part, the part that survives after everything else has been dismantled. And it is dismantled, if it is, slowly, through action. Not through affirmation, not through believing hard enough, through the specific, incremental experience of doing the thing and surviving it. Of opening the account, of making the investment, of building the second income, of having the conversation, of watching over months and years, the gap between where you started and where you are become undeniable. You learn who you are by watching what you do under pressure. And every time you choose the long game over the easy one, every time you buy the asset instead of the liability, every time you invest in the skill instead of the lifestyle, you are not just making a financial decision. You are telling yourself who you are. You are updating the internal record, the one that was written in by every quiet moment of financial shame, every too tight month, every ceiling you were expected to stop growing at. You are overwriting that record, slowly, messily, with actual data. At 22, with the right rules and the will to use them, you are not just starting a financial strategy. You are starting a new story. Not just for yourself. For the version of you that will be a parent someday, sitting at a table, having a conversation with a child who will absorb it completely, without knowing they're doing it. Who will grow up with a map they didn't have to find? Who will look up at a ceiling that isn't there anymore and assume, because they have no evidence to the contrary, that the sky has always been this open? They won't know about the years you stared at the underside of it. They won't know about the 22 years old who found a sentence in a book and felt the world rearranged slightly. They won't know about the quiet decision, the unglamorous one, to learn the rules that the other table already knew. They'll just know that the sky is open, and they'll aim for it without asking permission. Because you didn't ask permission. You just started.